Hi, this is Tamsen Granger.
This is Dan Abuhoff.
With Tamsen and Dan Read the Paper on Sunday, September 8th, 2019.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and we have spent a full week back in civilization out in New Jersey / Pennsylvania, New York, and we had a packed week. Would you say it was a packed week? I'd say it was a packed week.
Mainly it was a recovery week.
Both, all things considered. We did have a big bike ride on Saturday. The Sourlands Spectacular, which is in the Sourlands near Hopewell, New Jersey. Is that the way to describe it?
For once, it was indeed spectacular.
It was unbelievable. It was a beautiful day on Saturday. It was probably mid-70s, super clear. And, sometimes I guess you just notice the surroundings more than others. And this just seemed to make a tremendous impression. It was beautiful, hilly, but spectacular scenery, just great.
Yeah, we did about 35.5 miles.
Yeah.
And we even ran into a fox hunt.
We did.
Which, horses, hounds. We didn't see a fox. We saw a dead fox later on in the ride.
Hit by a car.
But probably running from the hounds.
Probably, yeah.
It was amazing.
It was like a Downton Abbey scene. Everyone was wearing, the coats and everything, and they have hounds. They don't have 3 hounds. They have like 15 hounds, and it's a little scary.
Maybe more than that. Yeah. But you forget how beautiful New Jersey is. Mm. If you're, mainly you're along the turnpike, etc., there are beautiful farms and gardens and rolling hills. It was a spectacular natural landscape.
Yeah, and it's hidden away. I mean, Hopewell is a real town, and you wouldn't have thought that there's so much scenery.
No, a few miles in any direction. There's your usual, suburban splendor.
Right, but this is but not really splendor. But this is really mountains right near Hopewell, and it was fantastic. I mean, look, we've ridden all over the world at this point. Certainly a lot of Europe.
All over the world.
I'll stick with that. And we haven't seen basically fox hunts, but beyond that, this matches up. It really does. I mean, every part of Europe has a different character, but this was beautiful.
Yeah, beautiful ride, and excellent lunch provided by the sponsors of the ride afterwards. Well, surprisingly excellent.
Brick Tavern.
And so
nice
it was
day.
A good day.
Yeah. Although it takes something out of you.
But now back to business.
Back to business. Well, back to business. What did we see? What did I see? I guess I take credit for this. When I open up the paper during the week and they have an article about the film series, a Lincoln Center retrospective, a full-page article about Say Amen Somebody, a film that we saw in 1982 out of nowhere, featured in the New York Times, which was we thought was fantastic. And you remember that, Tim?
Yeah, 1982. It's a documentary about gospel music.
Right.
With some, famous old-time singers. Not famous to us. I mean, we love gospel music. We know nothing about it and didn't know anything then.
Right.
But some real stars.
The O'Neill brothers.
Thomas Dorsey, Willie May Ford Smith. Just a lot of.
Well, but what part of Wesley Morris's point, and he writes an article about it in the Times, and I'm not the hugest Wesley Morris fan. I didn't even love this article, but he made one point that I think is kind of right, which is that, it's natural to compare this film with the film that just came out, the Amazing Grace film, with Aretha Franklin, which is about another concert in the early 70s. And, Aretha Franklin's Aretha Franklin. It's not like anybody who sings gospel's Aretha Franklin. She stands alone. But these are folks that, at least in Morris's view, are journeymen by comparison. But they're quite good. And
here's what he says.
Yeah.
How do you pack that much beauty, wit, passion, musicality, muscle, raggedness, and poise into one song, into one note?
Yeah.
And I think that absolutely captures it.
Well, that's fair.
The music is captivating.
Yeah.
And
we thought it was amazing when we saw it in 1982.
We've been listening to the soundtrack
every once in a while. If you have the opportunity, whether it's at Lincoln Center or somewhere else, go. And I'm sure we're not going to get into how you might pull it from whatever service. But if you get a chance to see or listen to Say Amen Somebody. And we're going to, just so you know, we're going to play a cut from one of our favorite songs from Say Amen Somebody at the end of the podcast. The famous and identified in the article by Wesley Morris correctly as an outstanding song, Jesus, Drop the Charges. You have that to look forward to. So it was just startling to see that.
But the whole soundtrack is great.
Yeah, it is. You were playing some of it before, and one song, oh, that's a good song. That's a good song.
They're all good songs.
Yeah. It was pretty amazing.
So that was nice to think back on that movie.
Yeah. Nice to know it's not forgotten. As for current events, they just finished the tennis tournament. We should say something about the tennis, just because it's kind of interesting. By the time you hear this, it's going to be old news that Nadal won again. He beat Medvedev. And it had unfolded, and Tamsen will tell me, this isn't second guessing, this is first guessing. In our discussion of it, you figured Nadal was going to win. But here's what's interesting about it. When you watch these young players who Nadal plays, and I say young players, Nadal's 33, which for tennis is not young. And he's playing folks who are 23 or 24 or whatever. And when they have their first few rallies, and you watch for the first 15 minutes, they have all the strokes he has, and they have even a little bit more athleticism, and you can tell that they're younger. But the top men tennis players, be it Federer, be it Djokovic, be it Nadal, they win. And then, frankly, they win all the majors. And they've been winning all the majors for the past 3 or 4 years. Andy Murray's stuck in there 1 or 2, and he's also 32, 33. That's what's fascinating about it. It really highlights the mental strength necessary to win these matches. They're great matches, but it takes so much mental tenacity and concentration and the ability to stay with it when you miss a shot, when you fall behind. There's something about being that veteran who's got the mental strength to do it. That's what really separates them from the other two, and it separates them every single time. So even watching this, Medvedev at the beginning, 6'6", tremendous reach, tremendous strokes. Nadal's, an impressive physical specimen, but he's not 6'6". And as we discussed it before, you know something? It could easily be Medvedev, but the truth of the matter is, as it goes on, as they wear down, Nadal will find a way. It's exactly what happened. Found a way in the fifth set.
Well, how do you explain the women, though?
The women are different because the women, what you have there is you have Serena Williams, you have everybody else. And Serena, and I'm making the age point. So Serena's on her own. She doesn't have 3 cohorts like the 3 I mentioned a moment ago on the men's side. So the question is the veteran Serena going to win? And the truth of the matter is she does have the mental tenacity and the mental edge. But whereas Nadal, Djokovic, and Federer are very comparable to the athleticism of these younger guys, maybe they give up a little. It's close. Serena's given up a lot. And when you saw last year with Naomi Osaka, you saw that match, I know. And you can see that again this year against the young Canadian. Serena doesn't move on the court like these young women move on the court. So she's giving up so much in terms of athleticism that even though she has the mental edge, she can't close that gap in terms of the match. She beats a lot of people. She got to the final.
Right.
But it's too much to ask. But if it's close physically, the guys, and it's not just that they're older. They've gotten to this point because they have that mental edge. That's what put them on the top of the mountain to begin with. That's what separated them. Mm-hmm. And frankly, it's very impressive when you hear them interviewed. They're very well spoken. They're very thoughtful. They're very self-possessed. It's really something. So it's fun when the tennis comes around. Enjoyed watching some of that. But you had a great article about Jantzen bathing suits, Tamsen.
Yes, from the travel section.
From the travel section. I think I spotted it. Well, we both spotted it.
Well, I saw it, yes. But you zeroed in on it.
I zeroed in.
Anything to read an article about girls in bathing suits.
That's right.
I guess. And this is by Bonnie Sweet. And she is writing basically about the history of the Jantzen bathing suit, if not the history of the modern one-piece bathing suit.
I think that's fair.
And it really happens in Portland. There was a business called the Portland Knitting Company, owned by a pair of brothers. And they had a Danish partner named Carl Jantzen. And these brothers actually were part of a rowing club.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yes. Somebody in the rowing club came to them and wanted had a design in mind for a superior rowing costume, a one-piece kind of unitard.
Really?
And because the Jantzens they had this knitting company, and Carl Jantzen figured out how to knit a wool unitard suitable for rowing. That was, light enough because, 8 or 10 pounds of wool when it gets wet, not so comfortable. And so that gets them started in about 1913. And one thing leads to another. It becomes a swimming costume. Men want it, women want it, everybody wants it. Because up till then, and you found this amusing, there were all kinds of rules about what even men had to wear. To go swimming on a public beach.
They had to wear tops.
Yeah, they couldn't be topless. They had to have some kind of little skirt covering the dicey bits.
Really?
Yes, you couldn't. It was all very sort of prudish.
Oh.
And this really revolutionized the form. Now, other people would come up with similar basic ideas. There was a famous female swimmer, Annette Kellerman, from Australia, who wore, kind of somewhat of that idea of a costume. And there were similar costumes that are used in the 1912 Olympics by women. But it's really the Jantzen company that gets it going. That Jantzen logo with the diver, the diving woman, becomes very popular. In fact, it becomes a sticker that everybody wants. They send them around to the shops that are selling Jantzen. But everybody wants one.
All the bathing suit. But
they want to put it on their cars, etc. They're outlawed in Massachusetts as a danger to public safety.
Well, you can imagine people would go off the road. But there also one of the themes in the article, or at least one of the ads, said it's sort of the evolution from bathing to swimming. In other words, it wasn't just a matter of the suit wasn't just merely suitable for lying under the sun. You could actually swim in it.
Yeah, you've seen those old-timey, like skirts and blouses and get-ups people used to wear to dip into the water. This really allowed you to swim. And it was immensely popular all over the world. She has a wonderful story of her parents, I think in Hong Kong, meeting. Her father's a lifeguard. Her mother is a bathing beauty in a Jantzen suit. Oh. And they have a picture of that. And everybody has worn them, Princess Diana, on and on and on and on. Eventually they have a lot of competition. The company has been sold, etc. But a few mementos remain. There was an enormous, fiberglass statue of the diving woman.
Oh, really?
Outside a store in Daytona. The store goes out of business, and they sell the statue. It gets shipped to Washington State, and the townspeople clamor. It's a local icon.
Oh, really?
And they managed to get it back.
Oh, wow.
So that was a charming article. I've worn my share of Jantzen suits.
Really?
Oh, yeah, when you were growing up. And, I swam on the local swim team, and so we wore the Jantzens.
Oh, good. How were they?
Fine. Not as fabulous as the bathing suits are today.
Oh, well,
with the lycra and all the miracle fabrics that will hold up to anything. We had kind of, not very forgiving nylon suits with several layers for modesty. But, flattering, I guess.
I'm sure.
More flattering than wearing the big skirt and the sailor blouse.
All right. So this is also the first Sunday of the football season, so we have to say something about that. The article in the Times is very interesting by Greg Easterbrook, What is the Future of Football? Interesting to me because the headline is, Don't Believe the Naysayers, Fundamentally the Game's Prospects Look Good. This is interesting for two reasons. One is there are a lot of naysayers who think that the game is dated and it's on the way out, because in large part because it's unsafe, and also because the leader of the pack in terms of making that presentation is the New York Times itself. The New York Times probably has as many articles about how football shouldn't be played and it's dangerous and this concussion or that concussion and serious damage as it does about the games themselves. That's clearly where they stand. And yet Greg Easterbrook writes this. He is not a sports writer. I think he's an economist primarily. So he's doesn't work for the NFL, but he makes the observation that, in fact, there's every reason to believe the NFL is going to do well, whether you like it or you don't. And, in fact, notwithstanding that people talk about the deleterious health effects Players are playing.
The what effects?
Deleterious. That's
Okay.
a word. Look it up.
All right.
And but that in fact, players are having longer careers than they've ever had in the history of football. That concussions are down. That safety measures are being taken. He says and he identifies some things that could be taken, some other measures that could and maybe will be taken in the next few years. He says the real danger in terms of concussions and serious injuries is in youth football. He says that what they should really outlaw is Pop Warner football. And that's where many more concussions take place. Or even high school, many more concussions than the pros. Because
so you wouldn't play football at all till you get to high school?
Flag football. He says the kids should play flag football. He says because the brain, the skull is not fully formed, that's when the kids are vulnerable. He makes a convincing case of that. So he wants flag football for that. But as for regular football, he said, the reason it's going to be more successful than ever is what a lot of other people have identified, gambling. I mean, gambling is going to be a huge boon to the NFL. It creates a lot more interest. You see it in 12 different states now, online gambling, including your favorite Garden State, New Jersey. And you've got people sitting there watching games, making bets in the third quarter, saying as to who's going to score the next touchdown. It's not just beating the point spread. And he's probably right about that. So football will be around. The team that might not be around the way they're constructed now is the New York Football Giants. But even then, I'm going to take a contrary view. They got blasted by the Cowboys, no surprise today. But, I like the Giants. I think by the end of the season, people are going to be looking up to the Giants for one reason. The Giants are contrarians. The whole league's going pass happy. The Giants are building a team that runs the ball. There's a benefit to that. The benefit of being the outlier because everyone's defense is filled with players designed to defend the pass. They're lighter, they're quicker, they're thinner. If you're the team that runs the ball, you play that team, you have an advantage. So we'll see. I'm not giving up on the Giants yet, but this is not their year.
How about the Mets? Are you giving up on the Mets?
I am giving up on the Mets. It's now official, but they gave us a good ride. They gave us a good run against all odds.
All right. New book about Mrs. Gustav Mahler.
Alma Mahler.
Alma Mahler.
Yeah.
Called Passionate Spirit by Kate Haste. And there's a review in the Wall Street Journal this weekend. And some people may not have heard of Alma Mahler until 1964 when she died. And Tom Lehrer noticed the obituary. And it seems she had seduced every important artist in Vienna at a certain point.
I think he said in Europe.
In Europe,
yes. Yeah.
And she was married to Mahler. She actually had an affair with, and then married Walter Gropius, the architect, the Bauhaus, founder of the Bauhaus School, and famous architect. In fact, Mahler knows about this. Gustav knows about this. Who does he go to for advice?
I know.
Sigmund Freud.
Who else?
Who advises him to, let Alma do her thing.
Sometimes a cigar,
to keep the marriage together.
Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar, as Sigmund Freud said.
Mahler, actually, she marries Mahler is like 20 years older than she is when she's married him. She's already had some, romantic entanglements with such famous people as Gustav Klimt.
Yes,
the artist,
right,
and her music teacher and others. But her father dies when she's young, and so she's always looking for a father figure, is the theory. And she comes upon Mahler, who was 41, mother-fixated, Jewish, sexually inert, and fearful that he might not live long. He was low-hanging fruit. Is the way the article states it. So she marries him at 22, goes on to Walter Gropius. He is not always fully attentive to her, so she has a kind of a raging affair with the painter, the artist Oskar Kokoschka, who is obsessed with her body. She finds that overwhelming, goes back to Gropius, marries Gropius, has a child, and then when he's not paying enough attention or he goes off to war or something, she moves on to, as they describe it here, she seduces a 20-something Jewish poet from Prague, Franz Werfel, a tubby youth she sought to mold. He will be the writer of the book Song of Bernadette.
Right, yeah.
And so, but, you know, she seems to have been quite enticing. Yeah. Although, as reported by one of her daughters, when she was pushing 40, she was no longer beautiful. She looked like a laundry sack. But she had only to enter a room to command total attention and could still arouse desire. So
there you go.
Quite,
well, you know, I think we should
quite
mention,
a fascinating person.
So Tom Lehrer, for those not entirely familiar, was I'm going to say a math professor at MIT, who also was a great creator and singer of satirical songs, who was very popular in the early 60s.
Many of them political.
Many of them political. Yeah. And his song, aptly named, called Alma Mahler, told the story of her affairs with these three gentlemen that she married and others in between. And it's a humorous song. If you get a chance, you can look that up. It's Lehrer. He's funny. He was funny, I think.
He's very funny.
Yeah. Yeah, so here's something. Here's a positive article. We like to have something positive every once in a while. You know, it just stands on its own, give you reason to hope. And it's an article in the Times called Building a Colossus to Feed the Masses. That sounds almost biblical, right? There's a company called AppHarvest who is building a huge greenhouse in Kentucky which will cover 60 acres and yield 45 million
No, wait
pounds.
a minute. I thought it was more acres than that.
Well, no.
Are you sure it's only 60?
It is only 60. Yield 45 million pounds of produce. Trust me, I double-checked it. But the fact of the matter is that what's this fellow decided, who's behind it, whose name I'll give you in a second here.
Jonathan Webb. He's starting. He's from Kentucky. Kentucky, of course, being a great source of tobacco, and he got it in his head that Kentucky obviously has to switch, but it still has the potential to be a well, it's not just tobacco.
Resource.
They've lost the whole coal mining.
Yeah,
industry.
That's true too. Right.
Okay?
So, but they have rich land.
So they need something to replace.
Right.
And he's trying to think up what could be.
Right. So this is your classic startup, except it's not high tech. It's not all about software, but it's using all these high tech methods in order to grow these vegetables organically and efficiently, and in a way that can compete with vegetables all over the world, including primarily tomatoes, is what they're focused on in this article more than anything else. And most of our tomatoes come from foreign countries, it turns out.
Well, come from Mexico and Canada.
Yeah, Jersey tomatoes notwithstanding.
Who does he go to for help in building this greenhouse? The Dutch.
Yes, the Dutch.
The Dutch, the great, greenhousers. Great, what would you call them? Horticulturalists, but also they're great at all this technology.
Exactly.
And so
they have these huge greenhouses.
It's going to have solar energy to control the temperature, etc. It's going to use recycled rainwater. Okay, and none of the water is going to go back into the soil or whatever. It's going to be, recycled throughout the system. Yeah. So it all their insect control will be done through biological means, not chemical. So it's trying to be very green, as you might say, and seems pretty exciting. And he seems to think that this kind of ag tech is a important way to go in the future.
And it seems to have an angel fund behind it. It's something called Rise of the Rest. A lot of the money comes from Steve Case, who's the co-founder of AOL. And Rise of the Rest, the managing partner of Rise of the Rest is J.D. Vance, who wrote Hillbilly Elegy, which was a huge book a few years ago, mostly about politics in places like this, in Kentucky and West Virginia or whatever. But this is the idea. How are you going to put these towns on the map economically? And the answer is a high-tech venture which takes full advantage of their natural resources. So who knows? I mean, it could be a fantastic thing, and they're already looking forward to other greenhouses in other locales. Yeah,
but will they just taste like supermarket tomatoes?
No reason to think it won't be good. We'll find out.
There's a lot of reasons to think it won't be good.
We'll find out.
Mr. Sunshine. You need Mr. Sunshine.
We'll find out.
I live in Jersey.
Okay. I understand.
It's all about the tomatoes.
Right. Look, obviously, there's nothing going to beat a local grown tomato. But if most of the tomatoes come from, as you said, where is it, Mexico and where else?
Canada.
Canada. Well, then that's where most of the tomatoes are coming from. So can they compete with those? I think they can.
All right. The challenge is to not just, grow a lot, but grow
right,
a lot
we'll
good.
See. We'll see.
All right. So there you have. Now this was there was an article a couple weeks ago.
This is museum update, isn't it?
This is a museum update. It's just a couple. It's not really late, but I was looking at an old newspaper, and there was a mention of an exhibition that's in Chicago, actually, at the Art Institute, and it is called "In a Cloud, in a Wall, in a Chair: 6 Modernists in Mexico at Mid-Century." And it just opened, actually, September 6th. It's going to be there till January 12th. What's interesting about it is it takes the work of 6 women who worked in Mexico at the time. Only one is Mexican-born, but it really kind of points up what's going on. I mean, we're familiar with Frida Kahlo, and Diego Rivera, etc. And this exhibition tries to explore artists actually in a variety of media, textiles, furniture, photo montage, that have been somewhat ignored. I think this is interesting because in this day and age, I think we just think of Mexico, we think of drugs, we think of kidnapping, we think of immigration issues, and you forget, you ignore what an amazing, cultural history it has, and the very, interesting kind of involvements of Europeans, but many Americans in the development and exploration of a lot of their cultural traditions, especially around the mid-century. I love to collect mid-century Mexican silver.
Yeah.
Which was, to some extent, revived by an American during that period, William Spratling, in the Tasco area. So this sounds like an interesting article, has some interesting people in it, including Annie Albers, wife of Joseph Albers, famous artist.
Okay.
All right, moving right along. Another fun article was actually about famous Viking ships, okay? And let me just say, little shout out to Norway here, okay?
Yeah.
What you don't realize is I've been looking at the download numbers, and we had a flurry of interest from Norwegian downloaders.
No surprise
in this
to me.
podcast.
You know why?
Recently. Why?
Because they're all Vikings, and Vikings go for us.
Vikings go for it. We have only met a few. We've never been to Norway, right? Have we ever been to Norway? I don't think so.
No.
And we've only met a few Norwegians, but they were fantastic people. You have to say, we had 3 au pairs.
Oh,
okay?
yeah, of course, yeah.
And all fantastic.
Yeah.
Benta, Gree, Stain.
Right.
Just fabulous young people. They were all very physically fit.
You don't think they're
very
downloading
pleasant.
it? That's not who's downloading it.
For all I know, Gria's got nothing going on, and she's downloaded about 100 of our
I find that
podcasts.
hard to believe, yeah.
Remember, Stain was he was a
big guy.
He was,
Archery. Yes.
And I remember, I said to Stain, "Is your father in archery?" He said, "No." And I forget what his father did, some kind of sport. And I said, "Well, why don't you do that? In America, he said, my father said to me, it is not for me to tell you what to do." And I said, that would never work in America. No. Parents tell the children what to do.
Well, it's tough to hire an au pair who has that point of view. That makes you a little nervous.
They were so pleasant.
Yes.
And so kind of open-minded.
Right.
A breath of fresh air.
Yeah.
So we tend to have very positive thoughts about Norwegians.
Okay. And
anyway,
the Vikings, yes.
Everybody seems to feel that way lately.
Yeah.
Vikings are, super popular.
The rage.
Okay.
Even though they're awful people.
There's an HBO show. There's Lost Kingdom, the Game of Thrones. They do a lot of Viking stuff.
Do they?
Viking type stuff. There's going to be a new HBO show called The Beforeigners. And that is interesting. Apparently, the premise is that people somehow, there are these flashes of lights, and people from past history turn up in contemporary society. So they have there's an episode where some former like Viking marauders or something are now like, police detectives.
Really?
In some city looking into stuff.
Yeah.
So anyway, sounds terribly exciting.
Yeah.
But meanwhile, there's a crisis in Oslo. Okay?
Yes.
At the Viking Ship Museum. There are two famous ships, the Osberg and the Gokstad. Okay, so my Norwegian's not so good. I don't know how you really pronounce Osberg, but it's a very famous ship. It's in all the survey books I teach it. Okay,
Right.
If you want, it was a Viking ship made of wood, beautifully carved, buried with various dignitaries and peacocks and other kinds of mementos, built probably around the 9th century, like 820. They can actually age it by figuring out when the tree that it's made of was chopped down. But anyway, these ships, there are two of them that they have that were excavated during the 19th century, and they're at risk because the museum was built to withstand or to host about 40,000 visitors a year. With all the popularity of things Viking, they're getting about 500,000 visitors. That means, humidity, temperature changes, dust, vibrations, and this wood, after, several thousand years, is a little fragile. So they're quite worried. So the Norwegian government has, in fact, earmarked $200 million to build a new container for them next door and to work on preserving these.
All right.
It's not going to be ready for like 6 or 7 years.
I can wait.
But
yes.
meanwhile, they're getting very picky about who can visit the ships. So if you're planning, plan ahead.
Plan ahead.
And do
check
that
it
right.
out. Yeah.
And if you can't make it there, apparently you can go to Illinois and see a life-size replica of the Gokstad, which was actually made for one of those early World's Fairs, the Columbian Exposition in 1893.
Yeah.
And they actually came across the Atlantic Ocean in it.
Really?
Yeah, to Chicago.
Okay.
So it's seaworthy,
All
or
right.
it was for a few minutes in
Okay.
1893.
Well, all right. I'm more likely to go to Illinois. We're going to close. Sometimes we close with an obituary, but this is different. This is better. This is about Bob Newhart, who's 90 years old, still going strong.
He's only 90?
He's only 90. Bob Newhart came on the scene in 1960, maybe even a little before that, but he had a very big comedy album in 1960 called The Button-Down Mind of Bob Newhart. The first blockbuster comedy album, sold more than 1 million copies, hit #1 of the charts, won Grammy for Best Album, beating out Frank Sinatra and Nat King Cole. Well, of course, they're long gone. And Bob Newhart is still doing stand-up at the age of 90. Of course, Bob had 2 very successful television shows.
Is he really standing up?
He's standing up, so they say. He's, he's doing, Bob, a lot of people should be familiar with Bob Newhart. You remember they had a thing in Mrs. Maisel, that the husband stealing Bob Newhart routines and performing them.
Yeah.
And this takes place in the late 50s, early 60s. He actually saw that on the television. He thought it was pretty funny. He said the guy was terrible. He's supposed to be terrible, but he loves the show. But
he's been on like The Big Bang Theory and stuff like that.
Really?
Yeah, the guy's still making a living.
Yeah, he's he's always had this kind of stammer, kind of funny delivery, kind of halting, and he looks like he's not up to it. That's part of his persona. As a matter of fact, when he started the first Bob Newhart show, the producer came up to him and said, can you cut down on the stammering? And Newhart said, this stammer got me a house in Beverly Hills. So he's stuck with it. The article in the Times is just an interview talking about his various adventures and he's still doing some of the same routines he did in his 60s. I mean, I've always thought he was funny. I haven't seen him at the age of 90. They did ask him, this was kind of interesting, I thought, how his marriage has lasted so long. He's in Hollywood. He's 56 years married. He said, that's so unusual. He said, no, it's not unusual. For comics, and he mentioned Buddy Hackett, Jack Benny, George Burns, Alan King, their marriages last a long time. It's the actors and actresses whose marriages don't last a long time. And the reason that the comics marriages last a long time is because they all have a sense of humor. And that's what you need for a long marriage. So that's something to keep in mind. In any event, it was great reading about Bob, that he's still doing stand-up at 90 because he gets a little charge out of it. It makes him nervous. And I guess when you're 90, it's good to be nervous once in a while. It gives you a little energy. All right, so as I promised, we're going to close with a great number, one of many outstanding numbers from Say Amen Somebody, the unforgettable, the inimitable Jesus Dropped the Charges. This is Dan Abuhoff.
And Tamsen Granger.
From Tamsen and Dan Read the Paper.
See you next week.
I was guilty of all the charges, doomed in disgrace. But Jesus, with a special love, saved me by His grace. He pleaded, and He pleaded, He pleaded my case. Jesus dropped the charges. Jesus dropped the charges. Now say, to grace and faith. Listen, I was guilty for so long, lived in sin too long. But Jesus, with a special love, reached down with His arms so strong. He picked me up, turned me around, gave me a brand new song. Jesus dropped the charges. Jesus dropped the charges. Now I'm free, down in my soul. Woo! Look at here. He dropped the charges. Jesus dropped the charges. Although I was wrong, yeah, He dropped the charges. Jesus dropped the charges. Show me right from wrong. He dropped the charges. Jesus dropped the charges. I cast them all away at Calvary. At Calvary. Calvary. At Calvary. Calvary. Oh Lord, case dismissed. Case dismissed. Case dismissed. Saved by grace. He dropped the charges. Jesus dropped the charges. Yes, He did. I saw Him when He hung His head. I heard Him say, it's finished. It's finished.